Lord, keep us steadfast in your word. Guide us by your word and your word alone to seek the truth, seek salvation in your grace alone, through faith alone. All this is revealed by your holy word. May it be preserved amongst us, and may it be spread throughout the world as your kingdom may come to all nations around. Amen. So, I got a list of 10 topics that were suggested at our last Bible class. And the first, one of them was the Reformation movement, which October, Reformation, is a very fitting time of year to cover this. And this could be a short series, this could be a long one, kind of depends on how things go. So today we're going to start things off with the Reformation movement, focusing on the church before the Reformation. So when people think about the Reformation, I think there's kind of many misconceptions, almost like it's a cultural thing, it's an ethnic thing, it's a, I guess, a prideful, arrogant thing, when really it's simply just observing the Lord's hand in church history, right? Guiding people back to the Word alone. People talk about the Lutheran Reformation. I remember an evening chapel I gave in college around Reformation time, and one of the students complained, thinking, it's almost like we worship Martin Luther. I said, well, that's not the case, and if I came across that way, I apologize, because that was never Luther's intention. He even said, don't call yourself Lutherans, that's not the point. Call yourself Christian, really. And so he never wanted that sort of title and ownership, but that we take that because that is our confessional stance. Confessional stance is Lutheran, and which simply is Scripture is the only source of divine truth. And so, and you also know the other things that came out of the Reformation too, when it comes to doctrine. But first, before we talk about the Reformation, it's good to know what the church was like in history before the Reformation. So, I have that as the opening passage, John 8:31. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Now notice how those things kind of move along in succession. If you abide in my word, you're my disciples, you know the truth shall set you free. But with the Middle Ages and the darkness that came from false teaching, that very foundational aspect, the rock on which everyone should be built, was gone, wasn't it? The word was clouded. If you abide in my word, well, where is the word? The word is apparently being spoken in Latin. We can't understand it. The word has been made up in this way and that for centuries. That's what at least the average Christian of the Middle Ages would have thought. And so, if one were to be Christ's disciple, know the truth and be set free, they need the abiding word, unclouded, spoken in its purity and clarity. And so before we get into that, I want to talk about two misconceptions that have distorted the story of the church of the Lutheran Reformation. Number one is the Lutheran Church is a new group dating from Luther's day. I don't know if you've ever had a conversation with a Catholic friend about this. And when it comes to Roman Catholicism and those who follow it, it's kind of, you can get a mixed bag. You can get Catholics that don't know a lick about Catholicism. And you can get those that are very well read in what their church says and teaches. And in the latter case, one of the arguments they'll propose is the Catholic Church is the oldest. Therefore, they're the right ones, right? Which is a fallacy, a logical fallacy, just because someone's the oldest, because it's like the argument that says the oldest sibling's always right, right? It's not a fallacy to you. So, thinking along those lines, or the Roman Catholic Church is the largest. It has the most in its denomination by numbers, but that we all live in the age where the majority tries to say that they're the right ones, when in reality, just because they're the majority doesn't mean they're right. But so that's been an argument they used, and they say that the Protestants went off course. They all went off course, went off the beam, but really the answer to that is the Reformers were not innovators. They didn't make something up. Reform it back to what it should be. When I think about the Reformation, I remember my first area Reformation service, which in the Dakotas is held at Our Savior's Jamestown. And the preacher that particular day preached on in Chronicles when Hilkiah the priest discovers the book of the law and Josiah rips his clothes and said, how have we lost this for centuries? And so when I think of the Reformation, that's kind of what I think about is the Word of God was lost for centuries and then it's rediscovered. It's really sad that it had to be rediscovered. This isn't something new. They're not innovators. They're simply stating the Word as it was meant to be taught. And the next point, answer, they sought to restore the church to its original foundation, so they were not innovators. They simply were trying to go back to what was intended in the Word of God. The second one, and I won't talk about this as much as we go through this course, but that the Lutheran Church is essentially a German church. I think we've kind of moved away from that in 2024. Lutheranism's all over. If you look at our synod mission statistics, you'll see all sorts of numbers in India and Africa. So we've really moved away from that, but some people say this is really just a German thing. Answer to that, not much literature has been produced on the impact of Lutheranism in the Scandinavian countries, but you all have heard about it. I mean, if you go to Bethany and Mankato, you'll see a lot on Norwegian Lutheranism. If you go to Gustavus at Delphus and St. Peter, you'll see a lot on Swedish Lutheranism. So very clearly this is more than just a German thing. And furthermore, the stories of Lutherans in all countries, including those in mission fields, has rarely been told in a comprehensive manner, though Lutheranism did have evangelistic efforts to India and other places already in the 1500s. It's not well documented. So to say that it's just a German thing, it's just an ethnic church, is completely inaccurate. It knows no ethnic bounds. It may be the group or groups that the Lord has called to start this, but it has spread around. Now there is definitely something to say that the reason the stereotype exists is profoundly because a lot of the immigrants that came to America that were Lutheran were German or Scandinavian. But that does not mean that they're the only ones that can belong to the Lutheran Church. Of course, Scripture is meant for all. Salvation is meant for all. And so, no matter what ethnicity it is, Christ says it for us to go into all nations and teach everything that he has taught us. So that's another misconception, is that it's essentially a German movement, but it's more than that, much more than that. This study is based upon Conrad Bergendorf's historical work titled The Church of the Lutheran Reformation. His purpose is to help Lutherans and other Christian groups understand the background set by the ancient and medieval churches, so we're going to talk about that today. To trace the enduring and universal qualities of the church amid the ceaseless changes in the life of humanity. So this book goes on past the Reformation and explains how certain cultural changes shifted, or how the church had to respond to certain things, like persecution from the Roman Empire. How did the church have to respond to that? Church and state mixing together. How did the church have to respond to that? Nowadays, with the technological movement, how does the church react to that and make use of what's good and avoid what's evil that comes with all that? And the last point, to relate the Church of the Lutheran Reformation to the universal church of all ages, I put that in lowercase c because he's not referring to the Holy Christian Church there, he's referring to all entities that bear the name of Christian. So how does the Lutheran Church relate to the Baptists or the Anglicans and so on and so forth? So this is his goal and focus in his book, and that's where we will begin. So if you turn the page to Onward from the Council of Nicaea, that's where we begin our journey, if you will. So, The section of Scripture I'll read: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word is with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. This man came for a witness, to bear witness of the light, that all through him might believe. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light. That was the true light, which gives light to every man coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God. To those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. So John opens his gospel to demonstrate that Jesus Christ is the Word of God, the made flesh, that Jesus Christ is God, equal with the Father, co-eternal with Father and Holy Spirit. And that's where we pick up with the Nicene Creed. At the opening statement of the Augsburg Confession, the Lutheran Reformers declared that they had held to the confession of the Nicene Creed. Now, why would that be important? Why would he have to tell Emperor Charles that, hey, we subscribe to the Nicene Creed? Why did the Lutheran Reformers, so they wrote the Augsburg Confession to Emperor Charles, and I'll give you a little bit of background. So, the Holy Roman Empire, which is kind of the ruling power in Europe around the 1500s, was under attack or threat from the Muslim Turks, and Emperor Charles thought, we need a unified front so we can fight them back. But in order to do that, we need everyone to agree religiously so that we can have a united front in battle. And so he calls forth the Reformed and Lutheran movements to kind of figure things out doctrinally. Can we agree on Scripture? Can we agree what the Bible says? And the Lutherans presented the Augsburg Confession, which is, this is what the Scriptures say, this is what we confess. And the first thing they say to Emperor Charles is that they confess the Nicene Creed. The Nicene Creed is a staple for Christian groups. And so that's the important thing, is to show Emperor Charles, hey, we're not heretics that deny Christ. We believe in the triune God as the eternal God who gives us the truth in Scripture and gives us salvation through Jesus Christ. And so they state this forward as this is what we subscribe to, this is our mission statement, if you will. This is what we believe in, our charter. And so the Nicene Creed then falls into what we call a symbol. We talked about that last Bible class. A symbol is a standard or measure of faith, a standard or measure of belief. And every time a symbol came out, it usually came out with the context of doctrinal differences and false teachings. And so the way I kind of explained this in a Bible class previous, is that each symbol shows us why we are not in fellowship with a particular group. So going from most basic to most complex, and even just a time order, you begin with the Apostles' Creed, which shows us why we're not unbelievers or non-Christians. It declares the simple Christian faith. The Nicene and Athanasian creeds today would show us why we're not Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons. Because in their religion, the belief system is that Jesus is lesser than God, which the Nicene creeds and the Athanasian creeds demonstrate that Jesus is God, equal with Father and Holy Spirit. The Augsburg Confession and its apology and much of the small called articles demonstrate why we are not Roman Catholic, more or less. The small-called articles and Augsburg Confession to some degree, and the formula of Concord demonstrate why we're not Reformed, Baptist, Evangelical, Methodist. And it goes on. The brief statement in 1932 shows us why we're not ELCA. And concerning church and ministry and concerning church fellowship show us why we're not Missouri, Wisconsin, or ELS. So you see how that goes from simple, most basic, to the most complicated in succession. And it just so happens that those all came out chronologically as well. So it demonstrates this is what we believe, teach, and confess. This is our stance, and that's the rule, the measure of faith that does not change. So, when the ancient church went through years of discussion concerning the relationship of Jesus Christ to the divine being, this creed came out. The creed, from the Latin word credo, meaning I believe. A creed is an official declaration of faith. And it clearly states that Jesus Christ is the revelation of God to man, and together with the Holy Spirit, one with the Father in a threefold unity. The Nicene Creed became the teaching of the Christian church everywhere, so that the church was identified by its faith, believing that Christ reveals to man the nature of God, is himself God, and is head of the church. The church then went forward with the Nicene Creed as its charter, proclaiming Christ, who was born, crucified for the sins of the world, raised from the dead, and now in heavenly power directs his church until his return to judge all the world, and then reign in his kingdom of glory. His present kingdom includes all who have faith in Christ's atoning work and sacrifice, and whose sins are forgiven by his grace. These are they who have eternal fellowship with him. The Holy Christian Church, in other words, right? I'll pause there. Are there any thoughts, comments, or questions? Yes?
So do the Methodist, the Baptist, the other non-Catholic churches, they don't use the Nicene Creed?
They don't?
That's your point. Do they have something similar?
Well, so here's the deal with that. It's a confession of theirs, but they don't use it in church like we do. They call it vain repetition. I'm broad stroking here, not every Methodist church does that. But that is an argument I have heard from Reformed preachers, is that we leave the creed out because it's vain repetition. And so a misapplication of the saying the prayers over and over that Jesus is condemning the Pharisees for doing. But really, I think it's a way to exhort and encourage one another. Remind ourselves. I mean, it comforts me hearing all the voices saying, this is the truth. That's the point of it. It's edifying. Right. It's edifying scriptural truth. And so that was my answer to the Reformed preacher. Well, this is why we in our Lutheran church do this. We do it for edification. And so it would be, I think, a gross charge against Reformed churches to say they don't subscribe to the creeds. They certainly do. They just don't use them in their liturgy in most cases. That's my knee-jerk response to that question.
And maybe from time they ceased to use it, is what you're saying. Because they would have studied this at the time that these were written.
Oh, sure.
The beginnings of their groups were learning, right?
Yep.
I'm assuming.
John Smith from the Baptists, the Wesley brothers from the Methodists would have definitely said, oh, sure, please use the creeds in church. The founders of their denominations wouldn't have agreed with such a practice. I don't think. But it's a recent development. It was definitely within the previous century, if not the last few decades, that started to happen. So it's not always been the case with the Reformed groups. Any other thoughts or comments or questions? All right, going on. This council was called by Emperor Constantine in the Roman Empire and was attended by 300 bishops. So this fact shows us that, number one, the churches of this time were organized under leaders or supervisors called bishops. So back in the early church, the structure and the bureaucracy, if you will, was very prevalent. They had bishops and overseers, and so there was that sort of system of oversight, and eventually we would see that that system of oversight would be abused. The bishops taking power grabs over things, and that was not meant to be the case. The second point is that they stood in a relationship to the state that enabled the emperor to exercise influence over them. Emperor Constantine says, "This is the state religion now." And we'll get to that point later on. So, going on, the Mediterranean had been under the rule of Rome for centuries. Christ was born during the rule of Caesar Augustus, and Christ suffered at the hands of Governor Pilate of Judea. The Apostle Paul appealed to Caesar while in prison and waiting trial. Emperors persecuted the church for centuries due to their worship of another lord than Caesar. Caesar, the Roman emperor, was seen as a god, and you had to worship the emperor. Christians refused. They ought to obey God rather than men. And often were, well, you've heard the stories, put in colosseums. Not everyone was, they did that with exceptional cases, like the preacher Polycarp, they burned at the stake, and other things, other events like that. And so that persecution went on for a long time, and this lasted until Constantine came to power. Constantine became a Christian and protected the church. Christianity soon became the official religion of the Roman Empire. While the empire's favor enabled the church to grow and prosper, the price paid was the independence of the Christian religion, which became the subject of the will of emperors. The relationship of church and state has ever since been a dominant factor in church history and in the history of states. So you might be thinking, well, that's an awful idea, mixing church and state, because, and there's clear historical examples as to why that might be. But it was such an appealing idea because for centuries they'd just been persecuted and persecuted by the Roman emperors, and you can just picture the breath of fresh air. Finally, we're not going to be persecuted anymore. They latch on to this idea of, why don't we have, we'll take this emperor that completely supports us, but not only, and it's okay to be supportive of it, but and keep it open for religious practice, but to then also dictate what is Christian, and having the government determine that. That's where the fear, the scary detail comes in. But you can see how they were so open to that. Centuries of persecution prior to that would definitely, I think, lay the framework for accepting the state regulation of the Roman Empire without even realizing it. But we'll see the abuse of that later on in church history. First of all, with Constantine's rise to power, the capital of the empire was moved from Rome to Constantinople, which is now modern-day Istanbul. And I'm going to speed up the historical debrief. The empire split into east and west. The power of each waxed and waned as time went on. After centuries of hard times, the Western Empire gained new vigor through the exceptional reign of King Charlemagne of France, who was crowned by the Bishop of Rome. That symbolizes the growing power grab of the papacy that expanded over the centuries. He gained more and more power, and here you see, I don't know if you've ever heard the legends of King Charlemagne and what he did for France, and very profound king, and everyone loved him. And here, on Christmas Day, the Pope, or Bishop of Rome, is coronating, doing the coronation service, and crowning the Emperor of France. And so that was a big deal. The Bishop of Rome is doing this. And so it's kind of a symbolic power move, if you will, of the Roman bishop. And that you'll see that power grab just grows and grows and grows, which obviously plays into the state of the church when the Reformation took place. Meanwhile, the Eastern Empire was weakened by constant attacks from Muslim armies. The Eastern Church, under the supervision of the Bishop of Constantinople, lost its power, though kept its autonomous spirit. When the Pope attempted to assert dominance over the Eastern Church, a violent resistance ensued, and the Church of West and East split for good in 1054 AD, marking the division of the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, related to Russian, Greek, Coptic Orthodox, and others. I don't know if any of you have ever met someone from the Eastern Orthodox Church. It's not a big denomination in America, but I don't even know where the nearest one would be to Sleepy Eye. If it would be Mankato, if it would even be the Twin Cities, that's how far away. Sioux Falls, maybe. I think they have one.
I'm not sure, I think they might, but no.
Yeah, I think Pastor Draley's mentioned that they do. I've asked him before. I think they have one. I think it's the only one in South Dakota, but that and Rapid, I think, have them, and then Fargo has one. I know. So they're the major city centers in our nation, but you're not going to find them in anything under a metro population size. And the differences between the two are very, very narrow. So the best way I can describe it is the Roman Catholic Church believes that it draws truth from Scripture and from the Church, from the Pope specifically on down. Eastern Orthodox is the same sort of thing, but they rather have a Pope by committee, if you get what I mean. So a group of 5 bishops in like an oligarchy, and that's kind of how, but they have the same concept as that the Church determines truth. But instead of by one man, it's by a group of 5. And so they have the same doctrinal understandings. There's the work righteous concern in both groups. And I guess the best way to describe the difference is Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. Somehow Eastern Orthodoxy is a much more mystical group. It's hard to imagine because Catholicism can be rather mystical at times. But in Eastern Orthodoxy, there's a lot of feelings and senses and religious experiences, much more than you would see in Roman Catholicism. So it gets really nitpicky, and it's hard to understand the difference between the two. One of their doctrinal differences is that they disagree on the date of Easter, and which we would say, well, that's a Christian liberty, right? So it gets. My point is that this is an important distinction, an important thing to point out, because now we're really just dealing with the Western Church, with the Bishop of Rome. The Eastern Church is out of the picture. They're only really serving Eastern Europe and like the Balkan states. Right now we're talking mostly about Germany, France, Switzerland, Scandinavia. My point of bringing this up is we're kind of leaving the Eastern Church out of the story. This is kind of what the point where they depart from the story. So the story of the Western Church continues with the Protestant splitting from the Roman Catholic Church. And this pivotal point of contention came by way of Martin Luther and the response of the Lutheran reformers to Emperor Charles's call for the unity of the churches of the Holy Roman Empire. He explained why he called for unity, to build a military front to fight the Muslim Turks. So that's kind of from the historical debrief in general from Nicaea to now. Are there any thoughts or questions, comments on that so far? All right. So a little bit more will go on with missionary expansion. Lutheran hymnal 495, verse 3, can we whose souls are lighted with wisdom from on high, can we to men benighted the lamp of life deny? Salvation, O salvation, the joyful sound proclaim till each remotest nation has learned Messiah's name. Prior to the Reformation, mission work was done more obscurely by individuals and small parties, lone missionaries in humble monasteries, rather than by larger entities. While the Pope and Emperor were trying to determine who was in charge, patient and heroic missionaries laid the foundation for European Christianity from Scotland to Siberia. That's another thing. The missionary movement was not headed up by a synod, if you will. It was headed up by individuals because the synod, if you will, the Pope, was more concerned about power and power grab. So it was independent dioceses of of monasteries sending forth friars to try to evangelize the nations of Europe. France and Spain were evangelized by the 6th century. Great Britain and Ireland had early mission contact through Patrick and others. By 755 AD, through the Spirit's work done through his servant Boniface, which we talked about last week, Germany and most of Central Europe was evangelized under the Papal Church. So a couple of interesting stories in that regard. We talked about Boniface, the one that went into the town. In the middle of town was a giant oak tree, which they worshipped, called the Thunder Oak, the idol to Thor. And Boniface took a hatchet and started chopping it down. Everyone thought it was a bold move. They were afraid he was going to get killed. The chieftain said, hold on, if Thor is angry, he'll zap him with lightning. And that didn't happen. The tree fell down. He said, your God is dead. Let me tell you of one who died and is now living. And so it kind of set the stage for a mission outreach example. Very bold, but it did the trick. Another one would have been the legend of St. Patrick, captured by pirates, taken to Ireland and evangelized the Celtic peoples. And there was one pagan priest that was arguing and fighting with Patrick, and it got to the point where the chieftain said, now hold on. If you go into the fire and you're not burned, whoever burns to death is the one that's wrong. And St. Patrick prayed and said, okay, well, Lord, I guess this is the martyrdom, this is my time to come home to you. But the pagan priest goes forward, chickens out, and runs back and says, nope, I'm not going to die for this cause. And St. Patrick's life was spared because the chieftain said, well, then your religion's wrong. Christianity is the way to go. Which, once again, there's more to be taught there, right? But it paved this way, and that's just a legend. I don't really know how true that is, but it's definitely inspiring. And I'm sure these legends came about mostly as sermon examples to inspire people, but the Boniface one is better documented than the Patrick legend, I believe. In the east, Bohemia and Moravia, Czech Republic, and Hungary area were won over by the Spirit's work done through Bavarian missionaries. Bulgaria and Serbia were evangelized by missionaries of the Eastern Church. In Russia, Vladimir of Kiev declared the state Christian in 1988, though any real influence on the people required more work on the ground throughout the centuries. He says, I dub Russia Christian, but a lot of the people were still pagan. And so they needed to actually go in and preach the gospel to these peoples. Just because a king says the state is Christian doesn't mean it is. Going on, the Teutonic Knights, a religious order, used both the Bible and, unfortunately, the sword in bringing forth faith to the Prussians and other Baltic peoples. So they threatened, through military force, the conversion of some of these people. Which, you're starting to see although these groups were evangelized, you're starting to see the weaknesses and chinks in the armor through their way of outreach. Some of it was by force, some of it was by state decree, which didn't mean anything, just a piece of paper of a king saying, you're Christian now. You can see the weaknesses there, and the faulty foundation, and the weakness amongst the lay people to not really realize what the Pope is doing in the Roman Catholic Church. Because that was a big part of it, was the lay understanding was very poor, which is why Martin Luther came up with the small and large catechisms. And so, but you can see the poor instruction and mission work done. It was done, the Spirit used it, but it wasn't a solid foundation, if you get what I'm saying. Christianity spread through a very humble and disjointed effort, though this was a great blessing, the fact that the name of the Lord was now being used to God's glory and the salvation of European souls. Along with it came the darkness of work righteousness, monastic practices, papal allegiance, and other threatening doctrines and practices. So Christ's name was preached to the pagans, but sown in that were definitely tares of the wheat, if you will, and the seeds of false doctrine also came along with that evangelism. thoughts or questions so far on the mission endeavors of the Middle Ages?
It's interesting as you keep reading, it just gets more and more fragmented.
Yeah.
The power and the struggles and
You-
who's speaking the loudest and
You can see why it got to that point, how profound the darkness was by the time it got to Martin Luther's day. All this was building on each other, swirling and swirling around, and nothing was stopping the maelstrom. The next one is perhaps one of the most frightening details, the sacraments and liturgy. 1 Corinthians 4:1 and 2, let a man so consider us the servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required in stewards that one be found faithful. And that's key. The ministers, the stewards of the mysteries of God, serve faithfully. And here we start seeing departures from Scripture on the end of the religious authorities, if you will, and the ministers, if you will. When a new area was won for the church, it came under the supervision of a bishop who arranged the parish life of the members. So you can already see the top-down structure. Instead of a congregational voting and setup, there was one man, a bishop, deciding what the church got to do. A building was built and worship was instituted. The clergy conducted services called masses and brought the people into the sacramental life of the church, which involved the Roman Catholic designation of 7 sacraments. These are baptism, confirmation, marriage, extreme unction, communion, penance, and ordination for priests.
This extreme unction.
So, priests going to the bedside. There's a belief that when a Catholic's on their deathbed, the priest needs to be there to administer that sacrament. Last rites is another term for it. And so, I remember my friend, he bought a Buick LeSabre from someone in rural Wisconsin, and he asked me to come with him because he didn't know the guy, he wanted to be safe. He was test driving this, and I looked up at the little mirror fold, and I saw, Catholic, please get a priest if found in crash or something. It was one of those little things, and that was because of that belief. I need last rites from this man. Which, imagine that. Imagine if you were on a road trip hours away, got into a car accident, and you needed me to show up. That's terrifying. But thank the Lord that's not the truth. You know the gospel. You know that Christ died to take away your sin. And if your loved one is with you and can also pronounce the same thing, that's the priesthood of all believers, right? We all have the gospel to share with those in need. And so, but yeah, that's a brief explanation on extreme unction. These ceremonies ordered and modeled the Christian communities of medieval Europe. All of them were under obedience to a nearby bishop or and faraway pope. The priest could exercise influence over the parishioner, especially in confession and absolution, for he could fix the conditions under which sins could be forgiven. That's really manipulative over a person, isn't it? It's like the priest wants, kind of reminds me of a neighbor's vineyard situation. I want this. Give this to me. He says to the layperson, no, I'm not going to. And then he figures out some sin about him. Okay, in order to make up for your sin, you've got to give me your stuff. Very crude example, but there's a lot of that going on, which is why priests got a lot of power and wealth. You got to give to the church this much, and then this amount of, not all your sins, because we still want that power, this many gets to go away. And so now you're seeing it really get to, you're starting to see the darkness form as you build up to the Reformation. He could even ban a person from the sacraments, actually excluding him from congregational life. The bishop was the only one who could confirm and ordain, making all the acts of the church through priests dependent on obedience to superiors. So the priest was under the superiority of the bishop. The bishop was under an archbishop, and under that it builds up to the pope eventually, who can then tell this priest to do this bishop to do that, and it just grew and grew into more insanity, if you will.
Do you know, is it still, if you're divorced in the Catholic Church, it's still that you cannot take communion?
I do not know offhand. It would not shock me, considering lately with the blessing of homosexual unions. It would not shock me if, based upon that leniency, would not shock me if that leniency gave up as well. And so, I think that the tightening grip is starting to loosen and loosen and loosen, but I'd have to double check to make sure about that. I don't know a whole lot about how the Roman Catholic Church does disciplinary procedures and how they do penance these days. I really have no idea. I think all right, so we'll just get to the end of this section and then we'll call it good. So Mass was essentially a communion service that developed for both Eastern and Western church influences. It began with the giving of both bread and wine, but soon disintegrated into only giving the bread at communion. On top of this, elaborate priestly ceremonies grew. These ceremonies were considered meritorious, that means earning favor before God by mere repetition, even without communicant members present. When communicants were present, they could hardly understand what happened because the Mass was said only in Latin. So how could they know? And they didn't have the foundation to know that the wine should be given to them too. That had been clouded for centuries. But it wasn't always this way. Over time, this fell into darkness. The simplicity of the Lord's Supper was soon overshadowed by elaborate prayers and remembrances of those who paid for the Masses. You get to pay to have a Mass to take away sins for a dead person, for you, or for whatever. And so it was kind of a credit to this Mass goes to this person. And so all glory is not being given to God in this practice, is it? No longer was the remembrance of him who bade his disciples eat and drink emphasized. Soon ornamental altars were built to enshrine the elements and to provide places for the sacrifice of the Mass. The act came to be regarded as a sacrifice offered by the Church to Christ rather than the truth. Christ's body and blood in, with, and under bread and wine offered to the sinner for the forgiveness of his sins, the promise of eternal life, and the strengthening of faith. The Lord's Supper is a teaching of gospel. It is not something we do to merit God's favor. It's something Christ gives to us for the forgiveness of our sins. And that darkened too as it built up more and more to the Reformation. We'll pause there. Any thoughts or questions, closing thoughts or comments?
Did anybody go to the Native Americans during the
The only person I can think of that made it to North America during that time was not Christian. We just had a day observing him a few days ago, Leif Erikson, the Viking. But he followed the Norse pantheon. He wouldn't have brought Christianity to the people. He was pagan. Yep. But he's the only one I can think of that made it over to that continent during the Middle Ages, or this time period. It wasn't until Christopher Columbus, but he brought Catholicism with him still. But still, Christianity came over around that time. Otherwise, I don't think there's any historical record that we have found that said that Christian missionaries made it to North America. I can't say that it didn't happen. There's nothing to show that it did.
So what about Spain?
Spain came over. They got down to South America. And if you're including South America in the Indian populations, then I guess that was around the 1400s. Was when Spain came down to South America, but they didn't make it to the United States, nor North America, to the Ojibwa tribes in this.
Spain, when they came up over in the western coastlines, California, so you have San Diego popular people.
Sure.
But in the east portion, those making up through Mexico and that direction, developed them for missionaries, but they also did like at the time where you better believe or. So they used to sort of speak about a lot of Native
Yep.
So they would believe this or.
And also St. Augustine in Florida too. They went up the Floridian Peninsula and did the same thing with the Seminole peoples of Florida. And then that brings me to one other comment is, they did the Teutonic thing to an extent, but when they got down to South America, where the people that could resist them, they ended up compromising. So, worship the Lord, and I guess you can worship these false gods too. And it became kind of like the Samaritan religion, where the Lord got mixed in with all the other gods that they worshipped, which some people think of the Day of the Dead festivities is kind of a byproduct of that movement. Because and you could see that, it's not, a lot of Latin America has kind of moved away from those things, but that was involved too, is that they would force them until they were threatened by military force, and they said, okay, we'll make a compromise. Jehovah and your gods. And so kind of a Samaritan type of thing ended up forming in South America.
So in most of these cases, whether it was the church directing what they were doing, trying to grab power and numbers rather than the care of the souls, and even in these missionary efforts, they weren't always necessarily caring about the individual's faith and their state of their soul in eternity.
It became a social political thing. If you look at the 1066, the 1100s, the worst example, probably the darkest point, was when Pope Urban II said, we need Jerusalem. If you fight for the Lord, you will gain heaven. And so that became the Crusades, which, if you think about it, the people they were fighting preach and teach the exact same thing. If you fight for Allah, you will gain heaven. And so they became that very heathenistic practice. Both sides were saying that same thing, but really at the end of the day, that's not what the Lord wants. It's not the kingdom of a sword, it's the sword of the Spirit. And so a completely gross misconstrued notion that we need to destroy the pagans in order for Christianity to spread is really what ended up coming from that. And so, like I said, you can see the darkness form over and over again. Now my question is, when the conquistadors came over, maybe you can remember this, you remember what time that was? I think it was the 1400s, right? Or 50.
Yeah, mostly, 1520.
1520. Yeah, I think, because it's around, St. Augustine, Florida was around the 1500s, and I remember that's one of the oldest cities in America would be that. So yeah, they made it to the Caribbean, South America, California, and Florida, but once again, it was a very crusader-like approach to mission work over there.
We built, in California, we built a lot of beautiful Spanish churches.
Yep.
And that was a huge deal with them.
For sure.
So it's not like Hindus in Minnesota in the Middle Ages trying to teach the Indians.
Not that we know of, yeah.
That's kind of sad, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Always over.
We're always over.
I like going under the radar.
But it's funny, they say they built some beautiful Spanish churches on whose back that they built it. They've been on the natives, who they forced into it, so therefore they have political power over it.
Yep.
And that was very cool. That ended up, take all the money out of the area.
And they did that, well, as we'll see with indulgences later on, they did that for St. Peter's Basilica back in the old country, but the same concept, right? Off the backs of the people. They would put on these horrifying plays to scare people. They would, I forgot what they were called, but they're essentially put on plays of people acting like they're burnt. The minstrels were involved, but they were the actors that would illustrate people burning in hell, so that motivate people to give indulgences to the church and be saved. And so there's these scare tactics of both psychological and by force, I think more so the former with the European nations, and then by force as they expanded. But you see, it's really just kind of a money grab and a power grab over time. And the word is the enduring thing, the one thing needful, is now lost And it took a Hilkiah, Josiah moment to see, oh, I found the book of the law. I found God's word. This is what we should be doing, and that's the blessing that was restored in the Reformation, is the word of God, pure and simple, law and gospel, salvation for souls is now returned through the Reformation movement and onward.
Well, it continues today with the mega churches, it's all about money, power.
Yep. The whole, I had 1,000-foot Jesus appear to me in my dream and says, you're all doomed if you don't pay me this much money, or something like that. Caricature example again, but something.
Joel Osteen never talks about Jesus was sent.
Yep.
All he talks about is how you can get heaven. I had a great parking spot for Jesus. The stupid stuff.
Yep. That's true. Yep.
It's easier to do that than the church. For some reason.
I think if they continue to play on people's fears, in that case, it's the fear of not having enough. You know, it looks so attractive that you want your life to be good and to be going the right way and to gain everything he's promising, but really he's manipulating your fear of the opposite and clouding what's really important. And the Reformation, when finding that truth, must have been so freeing because you didn't have to have that fear anymore. It wasn't constantly in fear, did I do enough, am I paying enough? It's all about Christ, and that, I think we forget how, because we're so used to it and we're so thankful for it, but we didn't have the other, we didn't have that fear over us all the time that we
Yes.
remember, you know, as infants before baptism we did, but, you know, I just think that it's really important to study this again and realize where they were coming from with that constant fear and oppression and to find truth and freedom.
Yeah. Yeah, the biggest thing for me from a pastoral perspective is the priesthood of all believers and the ministry of the keys, how that was shrouded out. Really, really bothers me. Just thinking about somebody living in sin and fear and guilt, and they can't go to their loved ones. They need the priest to do this, and that the power that comes from that, this person's sole fear, and the person who has the gospel to comfort them says, "Nah, I'm withholding this from you, pay up." That's horrifying. And now the blessing of that is that we all have the keys and can proclaim forgiveness to each other, and we have the freedom to call someone to do the same from a public standpoint. But at the end of the day, I am part of the priesthood of believers just as much as the rest of you are, right? So we all have the gospel to share with one another for the forgiveness of sins, that we may comfort one another with Christ's word. All right, I think we're at the end of our time. We'll close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation,